Blue Lock is a series jam-packed with memorable hype moments, but somehow out of the dozens you're currently thinking of, which I'm going to come back to, my favourite is one that you probably forgot about. Enter Bachira, a character that a lot of people apparently didn't initially like due to his monster dialogue, but do you remember what this madman did in the true first selection? In episode 1, when everyone else was petrified of the ball as the slightest touch would mean the end of their whole careers, he intentionally tags himself. By the time our brains have processed what this guy's done, he's trying to roundhouse kick someone in the head. And this is where we realized that Blue Lock was not going to be just a football anime. And it also made it clear that Bachira was not going to be a typical character either. Amongst the hyper-intense competitiveness of Blue Lock, we have a guy who not only intentionally puts himself in a losing situation with just 10 seconds to find a way out, also entrusts his fate to someone he'd met a minute prior. And that's not even mentioning the fact that there was absolutely no logical incentive for Isagi to take that shot instead of simply stepping aside and guaranteeing a spot in the next round. So why on earth did Bachira do this? Well, normal logical rules don't really apply to Bachira yet. At times he proves himself smarter and more rational than any of us. Prime example being his first awakening in episode 9. Team Z is down 3-0 in a 10 vs 11 against the unbeaten Team B. Everyone on Team C, even the fiery Isagi, stands around just moping about how they're so outmatched and it's hopeless and they couldn't possibly win against these guys. And we've all done this at some point in our life, right? But Bachira, his response is simply, well, if they're playing well, we need to just play better, which sounds stupid and obvious, but it's actually brilliant. I mean, no one else there managed to figure that out, and neither had I. Or at the very least, we all lose sight of that at a lot of points in our life. So I love this guy's mindset when it comes to challenge. You know, as he's running towards Team B with a huge grin on his face, he just says to himself, well, if we can't beat you, then we simply weren't good enough. Now, his implication here was that if they weren't able to win this match, then realistically they were going to lose at some point in Blue Lock. This is actually a very similar realization to what Isagi had in the first episode, where he realized that if he wants to improve, he's got to do something new. He can't just carry on the way he is. So he completely unnecessarily throws himself into the challenge. And it's interesting that this is so similar to Bachira's scene here, because this is the scene where he first saw Isagi as the monster he'd been looking for. But anyway, back to the match against Team B. Bachira knows this is an awful situation, down 3 goals and a player against the top team. But the important part is he doesn't waste time sitting around dwelling at it. He simply goes, hey, this either works or it doesn't. He's just excited because to him this is simply an opportunity to try something new and see how good he really is. I think he recognizes that it's only in these kind of situations where you don't have a choice but to push yourself that you actually see how much you can do. So as proof of this, if you've ever done any form of physical exercise, running, lifting weights, whatever it might be, and then had someone watch you doing that same exercise, like a friend or just someone you know, all of a sudden you find you had that little bit more in you than you would normally do when you're on your own, you know. In those kind of situations, you see how much you actually can do as opposed to how much you can do before hitting that limit you've put on yourself. And although I say it's one that you've put on yourself, it's more often than not, it comes from external things, and that's going to be kind of a recurring theme throughout the rest of this video. And you can see in the scene that Bachira was actually pretty surprised at what he could do. You know, I've mentioned this idea in some of my other videos, but as soon as you set that slightly unrealistic goal, you'll start to do things that you didn't think you were capable of before. And I'm sure something's come to mind for all of you watching this, you know, whether it's an exam, a job interview, or some other big event you've been preparing for waiting to start. Regardless of what it is, stop wasting time just sitting around thinking, oh, what if this happens? What if I can't do this? What if this happens? You know, as Isagi says, you can leave the despair for after you've lost, because all that worrying and doubting isn't going to help you. And going back to the point about how Team Z were just going to stand there going like, oh, we can't do this, it's lost, it's over. There's a pretty unexpected point that Bachira demonstrates here that I want to talk about. Now, I don't think there was anything he could have said to his teammates to get him as fired up as he was. You know, he was the only one, and he tried talking to Isagi about it, and Isagi was just like, oh, we're 3-0 down, it's 10 v 11. But as soon as Bachira scores that first goal, all of that changes. Rio comments that within the space of a minute, they've gone from being down to being fired up. And all of a sudden, Kunigami's talking about strategies and we should do this and we should do this. You know, he's completely changed the entire team within the space of just 30 seconds with a single goal. So, you may have heard the saying like, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. I think there's a bit of a caveat to that. because truthfully, the reason we do a lot of things is for the results. You know, I might enjoy going to the gym, but truthfully, the reason I go is for the result of looking bigger. And so we actually get things backwards a lot of time, you know. We're waiting for motivation to start to do something, but really it comes after we start. When you get that first compliment on your physique, or your first 1,000 subscribers, or your first improved grade. Then you get that sense of, hey, this actually works, I want to keep doing this. Now, we don't see much of Bachira for a while following the scene. Of course, he makes an appearance in the first showdown against Rin, but doesn't really do anything too memorable. And for the vast majority of the rematch, he doesn't really do an awful lot either. He's finally found a player, not just one player, but two players who are completely out of reach for him. And this is what he's been waiting for. You know, he's been waiting his whole life for this moment, yet all he can do is just stand around in despair. And this actually contradicts all of the points I've made about him up until now. You know, Nagi and Chigiri both point out how differently he's acting. It's the complete opposite of the Bachira we've seen so far. Shortly after, Isagi pulls off his first real victory against Rin on their mental battlefield to make the score 4-all. And then, in a very similar fashion to the scene with Barou, a testing, almost cruel ball falls at Bachira's feet, forcing him to confront all these doubts he's been tackling with, about how he's suddenly not good enough or he's never going to enjoy soccer again. And above all, that he'll never manage to lose that feeling of loneliness. What follows is him finally saying goodbye to the monster, and this kind of confused me at first because what did that actually mean for him as a character? Well, I think in its simplest form, it's him fully learning to have faith in himself. He's no longer looking for this constant external validation both for his own abilities and his own happiness. And I'm going to go further into that because this is a really tough one for all of us. In the modern world, if you spend more than an hour or two online in any shape or form, you see more people and more ideas than any of your ancestors would have seen in their whole life. And our brains are just not equipped to handle this. Any idea you have, there's a dozen people on your feed telling you why you should do something. Any accomplishment you make, there's a dozen people your age doing way better, or people 10 years younger than you doing twice as well. And this is so overwhelming for our caveman brains because it makes it impossible not to compare yourself to others. And it's impossible to appreciate what you have as well. But for Bachira, it's a little different to what me and you are going through. His desire was to have someone on his level to play football with. He was fully convinced that to enjoy football, he needed someone else. Now, this actually held him back quite a lot ability-wise too. For instance, we see he was fully convinced he needed someone to get past Isagi and the others, but turns out he was fully capable of getting past them all by himself. And although it's a little different, this is something I used to really struggle with a lot myself, having to constantly seek other people's opinions on any ideas or plans I had for myself. I just couldn't have faith in my own ability to make the right decision. And to break this, you really do need to take, as Bachira puts it, a gamble to break the curse to overcome this. You know, just for once have one time where you stop looking for that monster, that external validation or the kind of reassurance from other people, and just go for it yourself. But more significantly, what Bachira lost was his ability to simply enjoy being one with the ball, as he put it. He forgot just how much he loved playing football, even by himself. And again, this might not be something as many of you can relate to, but when I was younger, I used to really struggle with this too. I used to really find it difficult to just be content with doing the things I enjoy, as I always felt like I should be doing something else. You know, if you're quite introverted, you might struggle with this a lot as well, where you kind of get a sense of, oh, I should be enjoying going out to parties or doing this or doing that, but there's nothing wrong with enjoying the things you do. But anyway, getting back to that scene, it's honestly just beautiful to see him put aside anything external and truly listen to his own inner voice, as he puts it, because as his mum says in that conversation, everyone wants to believe in something, but as they grow older they find they can't anymore, so they pretend they can't hear that voice until one day they actually can't anymore. And I imagine something's popped into your head just hearing that, but you probably don't realize just how deeply ingrained into you some things are that have nothing to do with what you want. Wanting to fit in, feeling like you're not good enough, putting yourself through hell just to please other people. All these things slowly, over time, completely overwhelm that inner voice. This is a journey I've gone through myself, you know, giving into all these external pressures, going against what you want for yourself, rationalizing why you're doing certain things that you know don't feel right for you, until you look back a couple of years later and wonder why you ever did any of that. You know, you're allowed to disagree with what other people expect from you and what they say to you. You are fully allowed to do that. But I think there's a different character from Blue Lock who shows that a lot a lot better, and he will definitely be guessing his own video. So I'm going to wrap this up with what Bachira said to Isagi after the end of that match. Up until now, I was afraid of playing soccer alone and was hoping you'd save me from that fate, but now I've fought alone, I've learned the only one who can save me is me. If you remember right before his final shot, Bachira accepted the possibility that he would go back to that loneliness he had before, and this is a super important part of this whole thing. If you want to break this curse of constantly seeking external validation, or you're just overly worrying about something, by simply accepting that that worst case scenario you have in your head might happen, you'll realize it's not half as bad as you're fearing. You'll always find a way out of it. And finally, I've spoke about this in another of my Blue Lock videos, but as Bachira says, no one else is coming to save you. You're not going to wake up one day and suddenly that thing has just happened. If there's something you're wanting to change, you'll be waiting forever unless you do it yourself. So, cheers for watching. Not to be cringe, but I've seen quite a few comments from people saying that YouTube isn't putting my videos in a sub box, so be sure to turn on notifications if you don't want to miss the next one. Come join us on Discord, and I'll see you guys soon for more Blue Lock videos.